Lu Sheng rested his hands on his waist, approached Qin Shijun and with a penetrating expression asked where he had heard all those things. Upon feeling Lu Sheng's gaze, Qin Shijun began to observe him in silence, not knowing what to say. Qin Shijun closed his eyes, placed his hand on our boy's shoulder, and with a cheerful smile asked him not to make a fuss since it was common for a martial saint to choose a concubine, revealing that at the time, even the supreme martial saint had done so once. Lu Sheng began to observe his friend in silence without interrupting. Qin Shijun stopped resting his hand on Lu Sheng's shoulder, extended his hand to one side, and with a confident smile mentioned that it had been very complicated for the military department to obtain such a divine figure as the god of the army. The attention of Lu Sheng and Snowy focused on Qin Shijun and their eyes widened in surprise. According to Qin Shijun, if the god of the army didn't find about 17 or 18 wives and didn't have at least 100 children, the high command of the army would be furious. Qin Shijun's eyes began to shine with arrogance. He put his arm around Lu Sheng's neck, and with a mischievous smile explained that he had heard the god of the army was quite young. And as Lu Sheng already knew, young people were full of energy. He even bet that with 17 or 18 wives he would not have enough. Lu Sheng couldn't help but blush, lowered his head, and with an embarrassed gaze began to look at the ground, not knowing what to say. Qin Shijun closed his eyes, began to show a finger, and with a smile said that according to his experience the god of the army was going to have more than 20 wives. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng's attention fixed on his finger and his eyes widened in surprise and his mind filled with confusion. Qin Shijun started pointing towards the sky with his finger, and with a confident expression said that the god of the army was going to have at least 100 children. Bao Bai started to gaze towards the ground in silence. Lu Sheng gave Qin Shijun a soft punch on the head and asked him not to spread false rumors. Qin Shijun closed his eyes and started screaming in pain. Lu Sheng's punch left a small bump on Qin Shijun's head. He began touching his head and with a serious expression said that they were not false rumors, but then decided not to talk more about the subject since Lu Sheng was not going to understand. Bao Bai crossed his arms and with a confused gaze began thinking in silence. While Snowy was sunk in her thoughts, Qin Shijun put his hand on his chin, approached her, and while his eyes were shining with curiosity, he began smiling and asked Lu Sheng to hide Snowy well once the god of the army arrived. Lu Sheng closed his eyes and began to ponder in silence. Qin Shijun approached him and began to observe him attentively with a curious gaze. Qin Shijun put his hand on his chin again, and with a confident smile mentioned that if the god of the army noticed her, there could be a big problem. Snowy's eyes began to shine with sadness. She placed her hands on Lu Sheng's shoulders and thought that Qin Shijun was right. Upon feeling her touch, Lu Sheng came out of his thoughts and his eyes widened in confusion. With a serious gaze, Lu Sheng began to touch his head and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. The attention of Snowy and Qin Shijun focused on our boy. They began to observe him in silence. While they were distracted, someone appeared behind them and noticed that Shijun had also arrived. Upon hearing the voice, Snowy's and Qin Shijun's eyes filled with curiosity and surprise, making them turn around. 3 men appeared, one had a shaved head, who began to look at Lu Sheng and the others. The attention of the blonde-haired man was fixed on Snowy and a smile appeared on his face. The brown-haired man put his hands on his waist and with a smile admitted that it had been a long time since he last saw Qin Shijun. Lu Sheng began to observe Qin Shijun. Not knowing who these guys were, Qin Shijun's eyes filled with fear. He lowered his head and in a serious tone revealed that the brown-haired man was his older brother. According to him, this wasn't good since there was an annoying guy with them. The brother's attention was fixed on Snowy and his eyes widened with joy. He extended his hand and remembered that the last time he had seen her had been when she graduated from the martial arts university. So much time had passed that he could hardly recognize her. Upon hearing this, Snowy raised her head and began to ponder in silence. With a joyful expression, Snowy greeted Qin Shijun. Qin Shijun and Lu Sheng began to look at each other with a smile and their eyes began to shine. Qin Shijun extended his hands and with a serene gaze first introduced Lu Sheng as Snowy's boyfriend and the general of the Eastern Military Command, then introduced his older brother Qin Shijun. Qin Shiong's eyes were filled with surprise and confusion. He extended his hand to shake hands with Lu Sheng. He couldn't believe that being so young Lu Sheng was already a general. Just before they could shake hands, someone was surprised to hear that Lu Sheng was Snowy's boyfriend. Upon hearing this, Qin Shiong felt somewhat confused and went on alert. It was the blonde-haired man who approached Lu Sheng and began to stare at him with a furious gaze since he couldn't believe that a loser like Lu Sheng was Snowy's boyfriend. Instead of panicking, our boy remained calm. Qin Shiong began to observe the man in silence, not knowing what he had in mind. Snowy's eyes widened in surprise and fear, realizing that this man was Wang Yao. Wang Yao placed his hand on Lu Sheng's shoulder, started staring at Snowy with a furious gaze, and asked since when she had a boyfriend. Feeling Wang Yao's gaze, Snowy's eyes filled with fear. With a nervous tone, she said that this wasn't his business. A smile appeared on Wang Yao's face. Then his eyes began to shine with rage, revealing that he had loved her for 25 years. He couldn't believe that now she was saying this was none of his business. Instead of feeling fear, Snowy's eyes began to shine with confidence. Just before things could escalate, Qin Shiong intervened, stood in the middle, extended his hand and with a serious expression said that Wang Yao was crazy. It didn't matter if he liked Snowy, she didn't like him. Qin Shiong crossed his arms and with a confident expression said that what he hated most was people like him who acted as if everything were someone else's fault. He asked Wang Yao to stop making drama since nobody liked him, not knowing whether he had gone crazy after spending 20 years abroad. Wang Yao clenched his teeth and couldn't help getting angry. He tightly clenched his fists, and while his body was releasing martial energy, with a furious gaze he asked if Qin Shiong wanted to fight. Qin Shiong began to observe and far from feeling fear, agreed to have a fight since he wanted to see what skills he had learned abroad. They prepared to fight. But just then, Qin Shiong stepped in between them and while his body was releasing an intense aura, ordered them to stop arguing. Upon feeling his aura, Qin Shiong and Wang Yao calmed down. Then Qin Shiong approached Lu Sheng, greeted him as a sign of respect and apologized, asking Snowy to please take Lu Sheng to the mansion. Lu Sheng and Snowy began observing him in silence. While Snowy's eyes were shining with rage, she decided to listen to Qin Shiong, grabbed Lu Sheng by the arm, and decided to take him to the mansion. Wang Yao clenched his fists and couldn't help but feel furious, but Qin Shiong stepped in between and extended his hand, asking him not to do anything reckless. Wang Yao's eyes widened with hatred. According to him, Lu Sheng was nothing compared to him, since he was the disciple of a martial saint, and his master was the legendary pink swordsman of the Eagle Empire, revealing that his brothers were the best level 8 experts in the whole world. Without wasting another second, Wang Yao turned his back on them and started running, swearing revenge on Lu Sheng. Seeing this, Qin Shiong's eyes filled with concern. He extended his hand and tried to stop him. Lu Sheng, who was standing behind, began to observe Wang Yao in silence. Qin Shiong put his hand over his face, closed his eyes and felt somewhat frustrated, knowing that this idiot had just returned from abroad, and didn't know that Lu Sheng had defeated martial master Zhao Ji. Knowing that, being angry, Wang Yao had gone to look for someone to take revenge on. But today, with this event, there could be no conflict, since if they bothered the god of war, no family could bear the consequences. Qin Shiong bowed his head before Lu Sheng, and with a sincere gaze asked for forgiveness, explaining that he didn't know something like this was going to happen. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with rage. He admitted it was his fault because if he had come more seriously, this wouldn't have happened. Now he finally understood what all that display of power was for. It was to keep idiots away. The attention of Qin Shiong and Snowy focused on Lu Sheng, and their eyes widened in surprise and confusion as they didn't know what Lu Sheng meant by display of power. Our boy remained silent without responding. Several minutes later, someone returned and began to point at Lu Sheng with his finger. It was Wang Yao. While his eyes were shining with hatred, he began to point at Lu Sheng, who had his arms crossed, revealing that he had stolen his woman. A group of men appeared, and a confident smile spread across Wang Yao's face. The muscular man began to touch his head, and with a gaze full of surprise mentioned that he wanted to see who was the blind one who dared to mess with his people. Lu Sheng, who had his arms crossed, began to show a calm expression. The attention of the muscular man and the others focused on him, their eyes filled with fear, making them begin to tremble since they knew better than anyone who Lu Sheng was. Without hesitating for a second, they knelt before Lu Sheng. The muscular man put his hands on top of his head, closed his eyes, and while sweating like crazy, begged for mercy. Seeing this, Wang Yao's eyes widened in fear. With a confused gaze, he asked his brother what he was doing. Lu Sheng took a step forward, and upon noticing this, Wang Yao's brother knelt before him and began to sweat like crazy. Lu Sheng began to gaze at the ground and decided not to hold back anymore. Upon hearing this, the brother's body began to tremble with fear, knowing that he was dead. Lu Sheng raised his hand, and from it began to emerge a powerful martial energy. Not long after, the powerful martial spirit of Lu Sheng emerged from his body. The arrogant Wang Yao fell on his butt to the ground, and his eyes widened in fear and surprise. He couldn't help but sweat without knowing what was happening. Qin Shijun put his arm in front of his face, and a surprised smile appeared on his face. The eyes of Qin Xiong and Snowy widened in surprise, making their jaws drop. The brother realized that this was only an incarnation formed by Lu Sheng's vital energy and blood. The martial spirit of Lu Sheng began to emit golden energy and grow. First 10 meters, then 100 meters, and then 1,000 meters. Qin Shijun and the others looked like ants compared to it. Qin Xiong's eyes filled with fear upon noticing that Lu Sheng's martial spirit kept growing. Lu Sheng's spirit became so large that it could even be seen from space. Seeing how powerful Lu Sheng was, Snowy put her hand over her mouth and couldn't help but blush, while on the other side, Wang Yao's eyes filled with tears and fear. His brother and the others stood up and with a serious gaze gave the military salute as a sign of respect. The sky filled with black clouds, and Lu Sheng's martial spirit could be seen from everywhere. Snowy's mother and father approached the mansion window, and their attention was fixed on Lu Sheng's spirit. The father went into shock, not knowing what was happening, while on the other side, the mother put her hand over her mouth. The father's eyes filled with surprise, realizing that the god of war had arrived. Upon hearing this, the mother's eyes widened in fear, leaving her in shock. Qin Shijun's jaw dropped upon realizing that Lu Sheng was the god of war. While our boy's body was surrounded by golden energy, he slowly began to descend towards Snowy. Her attention fixed on Lu Sheng and her eyes widened in surprise. She didn't know how this was possible. Our boy took Snowy's hand, and with a sincere gaze admitted that he had wanted to tell her for a long time that he was the god of war, but had never found the right moment, and also feared she wouldn't be able to accept it. Snowy began to look into Lu Sheng's eyes, and then she couldn't help but blush and with a loving gaze asked if truly the god of war was her boyfriend. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,